On August 17th, 1987, this was the worst day of my life. We had just been celebrating the best times of our lives. And my youngest son was in the World Series in baseball. My oldest son had gone to Blue Chip Camp in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he became the 5th best recruit in America. And he was only a junior. He had his senior year starting. And he came home, said, "Dad, I want to work with the crew till school starts and make some money." So he dated a little bit. He was out on the job with the guys. And as I drove up on the job, the first clap of thunder and the first lightning we saw hit Brian right above his right ear. He took a direct hit, lightning. I got to the hospital and had 2 nurses come out of the emergency room and meet me. And they both said, "Was that your son that just came in that was struck by lightning?" I said, "Yes, it was." They said, "We're very sorry he didn't make it." And I was wet. I'd been down on the ground with him before the ambulance got him picked up. And I ambled into the emergency room waiting room, and they had seats all the way around, and every one of them were full. It was a bad day. But I walked in there, and there was no place to sit. And don't know what possessed me to do what I did, but I thank God I did it. I looked down to the coffee table sitting there in the middle of the room, and it had one of those little Gideon New Testament Bibles laying on it. And I just fell on my knees and leaned over and put my forehead on that little Bible, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I said, "God, give it back. Let me be the kind of father I need to be." Immediately, when I said that, immediately, everybody in that room heard the doctor back in the emergency room scream out, "Nurses, get back in here. I got a heartbeat." They got Brian a little bit stabilized. They came out, and he told me, "You're going to need urologists, pulmonologists, all the different doctors of all kinds." They had tubes in him everywhere. They had all kinds of stuff by the time we saw him in the intensive care. And the little doctor, he stood there with his hands behind his back and rocking on his feet. And he said, "Well, we've turned the cooling blankets off. His fever is going to continue to rise, and his heart will race, and he will die tonight." When he said that, something came over me. I said, "Look, you go back in there and do what you can for my son, and we'll get you some help." And I didn't even know why I said that, but within me, God was working within me. There was 8 pastors there that heard what the doctor told us. There was a little pastor there that we had gone to his church at Madison Creek Baptist Church, and he always wore a little derby hat. And Brother Harrison took that hat off, eased down off the chair on his knees and dropped that hat on the floor, and he looked at the other 8 or 7 pastors sitting there with him, and he said, "Guys, you're going to join me or not?" People were starting to pray prayers that I had never heard before, and that God would put his hand upon Brian and heal him, and his temperature would come down, that we would get a better report than what the doctor had just gave us. After he did that, he got up, put his little derby hat on, walked out. He said, "That'd take care of that." Walked in, I'll never forget this. If I saw her today, I'd remember this lady's face. And she's got a thermometer in her hand. She's looking at that thermometer. She had just taken his temperature. And I said, "What is his temperature?" She looked at me with a big smile. She said, 98.6. There's been miracle after miracle after miracle. My wife and I had prayed that we would be able to move Brian to Vanderbilt. Phone rings. I picked up the phone, and it was Johnny Garrett at the Bank of Goodlettsville. And I told him, I said, "Look, I want to get Brian in Vanderbilt. We can't get him out of here, He said, "You wait right there by that phone. Don't let anybody get on that phone." I hung the phone up, And it wasn't 5 minutes. The public relations director for Vanderbilt Children's Hospital said, "Mr. Bloodworth, do you want your son here?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I sure do." She said, "Get your family, get your things together, and get in your car and head out here because Brian will beat you out here." And while I was talking to her, the Lifeline helicopter sat down in the parking lot. They come in, they got Brian, they didn't talk to us. They took all the equipment, everything he had hooked to him that they could take with them, they took with them and took him to Vanderbilt. Every hurdle that we ran up on, we prayed that hurdle would be gone, that he would start breathing on his own. He would open his eyes, and his eyes were sewn shut. And we were asking them to cut the stitches out and let him open his eyes. It had been 3 months. This little gentleman had brought me a Living Bible paperback, and that was my pillow. That became my pillow. When I went home, I took that pillow home with me, and my wife called me the next morning, and she was crying. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. She said she was kneeling down beside the bed, praying that the doctors would agree to take the stitches out of his eyes. And Brian made a sound. She looked up at him, and he had torn the stitches out on his own. He strained so hard to open his eyes that he tore the stitches loose. He heard his mama praying. There was 3 doctors, and they got up in my face, and they stuck a finger in my face. And I wasn't the kind of person that would allow that. I would just hit you. He said, "Look, you're going to have to accept this. If he lives, but we don't think he will, he's going to be attached to the respirator the rest of his life." And they turned around, they just threw their hands up, turned around, walked out of the room. Before they got to the nursing station, this big guy, my size, walked to the door. I said, "Who are you?" You know, I was in that mode of operation. And he said, "I'm Bill Setliff." And he came in, he shook my hand. Never knew the guy, never seen the guy. He said, "I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee. I think I'm supposed to pray for your son." He said, "That's why I'm here." He said, "I'm a new Christian." He said, "I've been weaning myself off of Jack Daniels for years." And he said, "But I know I'm supposed to pray for your son." And this guy starts praying, prayer. He said, "And Brian, you won't need this piece of equipment. None of this equipment will be," and he's touching each piece of it, you know. And then I saw this yellow light come on this machine. And then I heard it beep, beep, light come on. This nurse, she's reaching this machine, and she turned around, big tears running down her cheeks. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Nothing." She said, "Brian's trying to breathe on his own." 8 hours from that prayer, Brian was weaned off of a respirator that they told me he'd be attached to the rest of his life. He's never, since that morning, never been back on a respirator in his life. But a little Presbyterian preacher came to me the 3rd day after Brian got hurt. He said, "Come out here, Dan." He took me out in the parking lot. And he said, "Dan, have you got a quarter?" He took it and he said, "Now you don't want this back. This is mine, right? I'm not borrowing it. You're giving it to me." I said, "Yeah, Joe, it's yours. Keep it." He said, "Dan, that's exactly what you got to do with Brian. You got to turn him over to God. He's God's. He was God's before you got him." And said, "God's going to do what needs to be done. It's not up to you. It's up to God." And said, when you can release Brian to him and relax in the fact that God's got him. If I dwell on the fact that me and him can't go hunting or fishing, or he's not got some babies, that would kill me. But I have to dwell on what God's doing and not what I would like to see happen. You know, we're still waiting. But we're going to get it. We're going to get it, and Brian still fights every day to get better. All I can judge is God loved me and loved him enough that we're still together.